Hello, lords and ladies. Today we talk about the expansion of the Roman Republic, starting in about 265 BC. We're going to look at how the Roman Republic expands, but anytime you talk about territory expanding, you should really think about 2 or 3 ways that can happen at max. Expansion occurs through conquest, war, you add on to your territory, annexation. If a culture needs your support and wants to become part of you, you add them on to you, and that's pretty much the extent of it. Unless, some kind of awful event happens and you just kind of take over land near you, say a natural disaster or something and people are wiped out and then another culture expands into the area. That's pretty much it, though, that you would see in terms of expansion. So if you think about it, what do you think Rome is going to do? Today's objectives on the Roman expansion, you're going to need to be able to discuss the role of the Roman army in Rome's expansion, analyze how it contributes and to what extent it's successful. You're going to have to identify Hannibal and Scipio, know who they are, and analyze the significance of each man. And you're going to have to be able to evaluate the extent to which Greece is going to influence Rome's development in terms of society, government, art, architecture, literature, those types of things. So these are the ideas that we'll be focusing on today. The Roman army is going to adapt to the same kind of standards that the Greeks had in terms of how they fight. They're going to use the phalanx and they're going to kind of master how they fight. So here we are with the objectives. Now if you need to pause. I'm going to move on. But if you do need more time to write, just pause it here. Okay, expanding the Republic, we know that in Rome this is going to occur through military conquest. So one of the reasons they're able to do this is that they have that strong military. All men between the ages of 17 and 46 had to serve if in case of a war came up. So that makes the military relatively strong. After having overthrown the Etruscans, the Romans do get dominance over any neighbors that they have in central Italy, and then they conquer the Etruscans and start moving against the Greek city-states. So it's going to take a little bit of time, but by about 270 BC, they're starting to occupy all of Italy, going from the Rubicon River in the north to the absolute tip of the Booth in the south. So what we have to look at is how are they going to do this. So by 265, we're going to see them conquering most of Italy. Subject peoples are going to have to provide troops to the Roman army. So that means the people that they conquered then have to help in times where the Romans need defense. So they have to provide men to fight for the army, and that's going to kind of strengthen their army in the beginning. Rome allies with Sicily, which is the island kind of off the coast of Italy, against the Carthaginians. Carthage is a trading city in North Africa, and they're going to have much contact with Carthage in the next few years. So the Rome's success is due to the fact that they're, diplomatically they're skillful, and they're also great with their army. Their army is very efficient, it's well disciplined. Roman armies consist of citizen soldiers. They fight without pay, they supply their own weapons. Their basic unit, they're made up of legions, and typically that's about 5,000 men. They have strong training in their military skills. Traditional values in Rome were loyalty and courage, and those things bode very well for men in the military. You have to be loyal and you have to be courageous. So the Roman soldiers are going to win brilliant victories. Roman commanders are harsh with their soldiers, so if your soldiers aren't doing well, you punish them harshly, okay? And otherwise, you reward them. So if you're a young soldier and you show courage in action, you get praise, you get gifts. If a unit, though, flies from battle and leaves and retreats, 1 out of every 10 men from that unit is put to death. So they have pretty harsh methods. Now, one of the areas that they're going to go through is Carthage. And the wars with Carthage are called the Punic Wars. These wars take place between 264 and 146 BC. So you're looking at over 100 years of fighting between these two societies. Again, they're between Rome and Carthage. Carthage is a city-state, again, in North Africa. It's Punic comes from the Latin word for Phoenician, so these are the Phoenicians that we had talked about, and the Carthaginians in that area. In the First Punic War, the Romans are going to win. Rome defeats Carthage and they force it to surrender. They get Sicily, Corsica, and Sardinia out of this conquest. Carthage is angry, though, because it lost, and 23 years later, they're going to come back for some more. So peace is going to be short-lived. It's only going to last for about 23 years after this First Punic War, where Rome is victorious. And again, they get Sicily, they get Corsica, and Sardinia. So these are areas that Rome is going to take out of these Punic Wars. The Punic War second version is starting in 218 BC, and this is when Hannibal is going to seek revenge for the previous defeat in the First Punic War. Hannibal, from a very young age, is legendary. The legend says that when Hannibal was 9 years old, his father made him take a sacred oath, and he made him swear himself an enemy of the Roman people. And from that moment on, Hannibal did dedicate his life to the destruction of Rome. That's the legend that's set up here. After his father died, Hannibal becomes the leader of the Carthaginian army. So again, Hannibal is not Roman, he is Carthaginian. He commanded a mix of troops that went from Europe and North Africa, so they didn't have... He's kind of bringing together two different worlds, European troops and North African troops, and so they don't even have the ability sometimes to speak to each other. So they don't have language, they don't have customs in common. That can make for a very daunting task for a general, but he is able to actually make sure that these differences don't disturb how they obey him. So he's able to overcome how this is going to work. Now, one of the most daring things about Hannibal is that he goes from Spain, and this starts in 218 BC, sorry, I'm not telling you the dates. It's one of the most daring things that we see in history in terms of a military campaign. He leaves from Spain. He uses elephants in battle. Now, this is interesting because, you know, people from Rome hadn't seen elephants, so this is frightening. This is very scary for them in the beginning. You know, it's very intimidating, to say the least. So he is going to lead his troops, all these war elephants, all these men, across the Pyrenees Mountains, through France, and over the Alps into Italy. And when he's coming down the Alps, it takes them about 15 days, and he loses about half of his army in the Alps, and almost all of his elephants. I think he had 2 left by the time he gets there. He does achieve his goals. What's interesting is that the Romans were expecting him to come from the south. They had no idea he would come from the north, and so he catches them completely off guard, even though he did lose half of his military. And for 15 years... Okay, so for 15 years, Hannibal and his army started to move across Italy, and they won battle after battle. They were never able, though, these Carthaginians under Hannibal, they were never able to actually capture Rome, and in the end, the Romans outflanked Hannibal, because what they did, Scipio is the Roman general, Scipio Africanus they call him, he ends up sending an army to attack Carthage, and he laid siege to Carthage, basically cutting off all supplies in and out that were, you know, eventually starving the people out, and that is going to force Hannibal out of Italy. They realize that Hannibal will go back and he will defend his homeland, and at the last battle, the Battle of Zama, the Romans defeat him finally. Under the peace terms that ended the war, Carthage gave up all its lands except those in Africa. So anything that it had gotten in Europe, it loses. It also had to pay a huge tribute, meaning a tax, to Rome. The most important result for the Romans, though, is that after the Second Punic War, they are the masters of the Western Mediterranean. They are not opposed by anyone. Carthage is no longer a threat. So in 202 BC, Scipio defeats Hannibal, and at this point the Romans then don't destroy Carthage because they are now the masters of the Western Mediterranean. At first the Romans allowed Hannibal to remain free, and under his leadership Carthage does make a rapid recovery. The Romans still fear him, though, because he was so powerful and he was so interesting and able to come in and surprise attack them. So they accused him of plotting against Rome, and so Hannibal was forced to flee. The Romans tracked him down and chased him, and instead of surrendering to the Romans, Hannibal killed himself. They're saying he took poison to do that. So the Third Punic War happens much later. It's in 149 BC. Hannibal is dead by this time. Carthage is keeping well to their terms of the peace, but Rome still sees Carthage's arrival. They were very upset still with what Hannibal had done to Italy those years before. I mean, he had destroyed much about it. And so they declare war again. They had this famous senator in Rome. His name was Cato, and every speech that he made, he ended with the words, "Carthage must be destroyed." So Rome declares war again in 149 BC. Rome attacks Carthage. 3 years after they start the siege, the city falls, and the Romans don't want Carthage to continue. They view it as a threat as long as it exists. And so they enslave the remaining Carthaginians and they completely destroy the city. The Romans actually went so far as to pour salt over all of the earth in Carthage so that nothing would ever grow there again. Carthage and the region that was around it became the possession of Rome. And so that's how they end their feud with the Carthaginians in the Punic War. So it's complete and utter destruction for Carthage. Carthage no longer exists. At that point, it is time for them to expand and take over Greece. So the Greeks are going to be overtaken now by the Romans. So because the Romans are very frustrated and disgusted by Carthage, you see what they did to them. They completely destroyed them. So it started to now realize, okay, we're ruling the Western Mediterranean, let's go take the Eastern as well. And that's when they start to conquer Greece. The Hellenistic kingdoms that were set up initially by Alexander the Great, remember, were divided into 3. And those men, Seleucus, Antigonus, and Ptolemy, are all fighting each other. And so these city-states start to ally with Rome in order to try to defeat the Hellenistic kingdoms. So the Greek city-states that are left try to defeat these Hellenistic kingdoms, and with Rome's help they do so. Then Rome annexes Greece. Annex means to add on. Greece is in a tremendous amount of civil turmoil. There are, weak rulers. They're fighting amongst themselves. And so Rome adds it on and brings peace to the region. And that is what they do to conquer Greece. They also end up taking those Hellenistic kingdoms, which means they're taking Macedonia, Persia, and Egypt, which is a tremendously large amount of territory. And again, if you needed more time, you could have paused it. In terms of the Greek influence that we're going to see in Rome, Roman art and architecture is going to be modeled after the Greek styles. We're going to see the columns continue. We're going to see the sculptures depict humans in their ideal forms. They're going to actually go so far as to take the Olympian gods and the stories and they make them their own. So they literally hijack the Greek religion. They give the gods new names though. So if you're reading Greek mythology or Roman, the stories are essentially the same, and what you'll see is that the names are different. So, for example, they change Zeus to Jupiter, they change Hera, Zeus's wife, to Juno, Poseidon, god of the sea, becomes Neptune, and Hades becomes Pluto. So, I mean, they literally just changed the names and kept the stories as their own, and they do adopt all of the gods that the ancient Greeks had. So, Greek culture lives on through Roman conquest, and even though the names have changed, we know that they are essentially the same stories and, that the Romans literally hijacked them.